This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Postcards from the Edge. I'm your host, Amy Nelson, and I have a special guest with me today, Dan Gunther. Dan!
Hey!
How are you doing?
Amy, great to be here. I'm doing great. Love being on the new show, The Edge, Postcards from the Edge. This is really cool. I've been catching up on these episodes in preparation for being here, and man, you're doing an awesome thing here. I think this is really great.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm glad to have you as guest because I'm usually your guest on Literary Trek. So this is a nice role reversal.
Yeah, definitely. It's cross-cultural exchange where I'm like Riker serving on the Klingon ship, I guess, or vice versa.
Yes, excellent. Good TNG reference. Yay.
I know my audience.
Well, before we get into today's topic, I just wanted to let the listeners know we've now done the fan response for each of the new, well, it's not new, but each of the series that have been released, starting with Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and today we're going to talk about the fan response of Enterprise. Now, the purpose of Postcards from the Edge is so that you listeners can watch the new Discovery and then leave your comments on the Babel Conference or on Twitter, and then I will review them just as I have done so far, and then we can listen to what all the fan response is for each of the new episodes of Discovery. So that is the purpose of Postcards. I wanted to start a little early to get everyone used to leaving their comments and looking for the posts on the Babel Conference. So that's what we are going to do. So listeners, Sunday, so excited, Discovery is going to drop, and please look for my post in the Babel Conference, and then you can leave your comments and let us know what you thought of the new Discovery. Sound good?
Oh man, I am so excited. It's going to be hard to live with me for the next week, I think.
I know I'm having all my students come up. Miss Nelson, you're so excited. You've got new Star Trek on TV. I said, yep, it is. So it's really fun. Everyone's getting excited.
Perfect.
Yes. So we are going to talk about the fan response and what you fans thought about when you heard that Enterprise was coming on air. Now, it originally aired starting September 26, 2001, and it was also on the UPN network, the same as Voyager. Now, Dan, did you watch it first run, and what was your initial thoughts of another Star Trek coming after Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager?
I did watch it first run, and I was pretty excited. To me, a world without Star Trek on TV, just like that wasn't a thing. So it was kind of almost a given. Like, okay, when Voyager's done, what's next? What's coming out? And of course, you hear these rumblings of, oh, they're planning a prequel. Oh, it's going to be about a ship called Enterprise. And you kind of go, Enterprise? But I mean, Kirk's was the first. What's going on here? You know? And the cool thing about this one, too, was that it came out when the internet was actually a thing. You know, not quite the social media landscape we have today, but there were message boards, there were websites with people who hurriedly updated with the latest news that they'd heard about the new series and that sort of thing. And it was a really different time because you could see the excitement and the criticisms in real time kind of thing. Whereas with the previous ones, it was all magazines and ads on television and that sort of thing. There was less of that, knowing what's coming. So it was interesting to see it form in that way.
Yes, I too was at that time finally getting into Star Trek, and I was watching it first run, and I was so excited to hear that Scott Bakula was going to be playing Captain. And for me, because I loved Quantum Leap, I'm sure many people did, and we'll read a couple of fan responses from that. But that's what really made me excited for Enterprise, was finally I know someone, because I didn't know anyone from Deep Space Nine or Voyager. And so to get Scott Bakula is like, oh my gosh, this is really, added validity and to the show. And like you, it's like we were getting used to having Star Trek just come out. So it was a natural thing. As far as it being a prequel, I was a little concerned because I was just so used to going in the 24th century, but I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't know any of the original series, so I wasn't worried about messing up canon or anything like that. And so to me, it was a non-issue, but I just remember, talking with my family, oh my gosh, Scott Bakula is going to be on it. So I was excited for Enterprise to come on TV.
Yeah, I was really excited for Scott Bakula as well. I've been a huge Quantum Leap fan for as far back as I can remember. And I remember, the jokes immediately started. You wanted a scene where he's on the bridge and he looks around and says, oh boy. And then it goes to the opening credits, you wanted to see that stuff. And
exactly.
Yeah. And as far as the prequel thing goes, I was a little bit, I have to admit, trepidatious about that. I wasn't, one of these people screaming on message boards that it was going to ruin Star Trek and all that stuff. But, we had just come out of the Star Wars prequels, and the word prequel was just so loaded at that time that, the Phantom Menace disappointed many, many people. So, there was a lot of that kind of tied up in there, and some understandable worries, I think, from some corners of the Star Trek fandom.
Yes, definitely. Well, we did ask listeners on the Babel Conference and what they thought when they heard that Enterprise was coming on the air. And if you would like to participate in future conversations, please join the Babel Conference. It's on Facebook. It's our listeners only group. It is a group that you need to join. So just go ahead, search Babel, Babel, and click join, and we'll let you right in. And then you can find our posts. It's the one that's a white envelope, and it'll have my name, and I will ask you questions about the discovery and what you thought of it. So let's jump into, we had 30 comments, and if you haven't read them all, they are very interesting. Some of them are extremely detailed oriented there. And so I don't know that we'll be able to read all of them, but we wanted to highlight a couple of them that go along with our discussion. So first up is Tim Hans, and he says that he was intrigued learning it would be a prequel set before the events of TOS. Knowing some of the prehistory of Trek and the Romulan Wars, etc., I wondered what direction it would exactly take. So I, again, wasn't familiar with this prehistory and Romulan Wars, but you were familiar with it. Mm-hmm. And how did you think that Enterprise, was it going to mess up things or explain things or?
Well, the thing was it had a lot of the same people in charge, for good or ill, depending on your opinion, that were in charge during, DS9 and Voyager especially. And there was some worry that maybe they didn't know the original series history as well as, some fans would. So I remember there being some worry for sure about how they would handle those events. I wasn't really worried myself. I was kind of more excited to see, like Tim, what kind of direction they would take and how they would do these things. The Romulan War, of course, is heavily alluded to, and I was always kind of hoping Enterprise would cover that because that leads right into the founding of the Federation. And, it never really got there, unfortunately, in the show. But, a lot of this pre-TOS stuff, it was interesting events-wise. I think some people were concerned about the look of the show, which might sound familiar to people who are paying attention to, rumblings on the internet these days, that, Star Trek looks like it was filmed in the 60s. How are you going to do a prequel? Will it look like it was filmed in the 50s kind of thing? But, I was more interested to see how they would do it and what form that would take.
Yeah, actually, Philip Hunter Gilfus said, I was not happy about the prequel idea. And there were the complaints about how are they going to do before the 1960s, 23rd century with 2000, 22nd century. Basically, it's Discovery basic complaints. So I think you can see that. Another thing that you touched on, Ruby Elizabeth also said, I was interested but disappointed that it was going to be a prequel. Also, I did not like the fact that they were allowing Braga to produce it after what he and Berman did to Voyager.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of that. The killer bees, they called them Brannon and Berman, or Braga and Berman, I guess. And I don't know. Some of the choices they made, obviously, I wasn't a huge fan of, but at the same time, I think a lot more is laid at their feet than they deserve. I think. They didn't obviously, I don't know, some fans seem to think they set out to kill Star Trek. And obviously not. I mean, that's ridiculous. But, there were definitely those concerns there for sure.
Yeah, I was not quite aware of killer bees. That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, man. That was Star Trek fandom in the early 2000s on the internet for sure.
Yeah, so continuing along with the prequel, Nicholas Paul Collison says, even though I was alive for the premieres of Deep Space Nine and Voyager, I was too young to have watched them and realized what was going on. But when Enterprise came out, I was 12 and the internet existed, so I ate up every bit of info I could get. I think at the time I was disappointed that it would be a prequel, but at the same time, I was excited to see what the early Federation would look like. So definitely getting that excitement to see what the early Federation would look like. I think that's a lot of fans were interested to see because everything up until now, including the original series, the Federation had existed.
Right.
And so this was a time where it hadn't, and how is that going to get set up?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of like what he goes on to say here, and I've noticed a lot of people commenting about this as well, the theme song, of course. For all of previous television Trek, we'd had orchestral or instrumental music, and now we've got a pop song as the opening theme to Enterprise. And definitely that was a decision that split a lot of fans, I noticed.
Yes, that is a huge topic that I have my own opinion on. And Brandon Shea Mutella has done one on his melodic treks, the whole theme song. So Nicholas continues and says, the first thing I noticed was the theme song. It was weird to hear words and guitar, but he actually liked it. I even sang it for an audition for a school play. Now, how great and inspiring is that?
That's excellent.
I still wasn't really able to watch every episode because I just started high school and it was always on too late. But overall, I remember really growing to like it at the time. But I always preferred TNG and Voyager. Recently, I rewatched Deep Space Nine on Netflix and realized just how amazing it is. So I thought I'd give Enterprise another go as well. It's still pretty fun, but I do see why some people have problems with it. It does feel a little bit like dude bro Trek, as I think the women at Warp refer to it. And the man gets pregnant and suddenly he's really emotional trope from Unexpected is super cringy. But overall, I still enjoy it a lot and think it does a good job of showing the bumpy road towards the birth of the Federation.
That's interesting. I'm glad he brought that up. Women at Warp, of course, as he mentioned, has talked a little bit about Dude Bro Trek Enterprise. And something that I found interesting and from my particular perspective, I have to say I hadn't noticed it, but in retrospect, of course, is if you apply the Bechdel test to the various Star Trek series, things improve from the original series to Next Generation to Deep Space Nine. Voyager is at the height, and then we get a regression in Enterprise. And yeah, in retrospect, there are some cringy dude bro moments in that show for sure.
Yes. So touching on still with the prequel, Ron Sarna says, I'm glad you asked, Amy. I was initially worried after the whole prequel Star Wars business began, but I was willing to give it a shot. So I think you're right. That word prequel was definitely loaded because Star Wars had done that.
Yeah, definitely. It was a bit of a P word. Like, it was almost a bit of a slur. If you heard it, it was like, ooh, they're doing a prequel. Uh-oh.
Yes, James Smith says, it was exciting. More Trek. That's the kind of spirit I like. When I heard they were going back to the beginning of the warp program, I thought it was great. Think of all the possible stories, the transporters, communications, phasers, tricorders, not to mention ship shields and weapons being developed and used for the first time, showing first contact with aliens we know. Once the series got started, I agree it was sort of slow going, but I didn't mind it. It takes time to develop the universe and the characters. I enjoyed watching crew starting off bright-eyed and naive. That's huge. As the seasons went on, learning from their mistakes and growing, it's a shame we didn't get a couple more seasons. So I agree with you, James. There was so much to learn about all those things you listed, transporters, communication, ship shields. I always find it funny when they call it the read alert, which is red alert. I think that's so funny.
That was great. The little nods and stuff to Star Trek, the little nudge, wink, winks to the audience. Those are always fun. I love that he brings up that sense of wonder and that sense of exploration and, dare I say it, discovery.
Ooh.
Yeah. But because, just as an example, Insurrection had been the most recent movie, and, Picard even has that line, does anybody remember when we used to be explorers? And Voyager was coming across crazy and strange phenomenon every week, but just kind of like, yeah, that's just what we do at Starfleet. That sense of wonder had almost seemed to disappear out of Star Trek a little bit. And that idea of these characters going out there for the first time and, seeing a comet and being incredibly excited by it and landing on it and building a snowman and, setting foot on a new alien world for the first time and just being blown away by it. It brought that sense of wonder back, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's one of the things when I did my rewatch last year for the 50th. Well, I got through Enterprise. That's about as far as I got. But so I did. I watched Enterprise all over again. And that season 1 and 2, you see the character development. And you're right, that wonderment that is exploration was very Trek to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I liked this comment by Art Shea talking about how he had actually drifted away from Star Trek, but he became excited about a new Trek that went back to before the Federation, kind of wondering how the Federation was formed. And the idea that this show brought me back to Star Trek, and I went back and watched what I had missed after TNG. I enjoyed this series, and it is in fact my favorite. 4 seasons was not enough. Enterprise made me a fan again. I really like this one because this is not something that I've heard a lot, that Enterprise was someone's into Star Trek. So I think it's important to remember that every series might be the one that really connects with someone, And then Bill Sweet said shortly after that, I had also drifted away sometime in the middle of DS9. I do remember thinking the prequel idea was interesting, but I was put off by the look and only made it a couple of episodes in, and then life got in the way as well. I regret that. It was the first series that I caught up on via DVD later, and it is one of my favorite of the new series. And this is actually something I've heard from a lot of people, is that they drifted away from Enterprise. They didn't really get into it, but it they caught it later on DVD or Netflix and really brought them back to the series. And I think Enterprise is one series that's aged really, really well. And I think a lot of people have come back to it after the fact and realized, hey, this was actually pretty good. And, there've been movements to push for a 5th season on Netflix at various times and things like that. Oh. And, people, I think, really, once they take a second look at it and come back to it, have really appreciated it more so than maybe they did during the first run.
Right. Yeah. Tom Elliott says, by this point, Star Trek fatigue had well and truly set in for me. Voyager wasn't doing anything that TNG hadn't already done with a cast I'd liked more. The TNG movies were on the decline. Oops. And I'd never been into Deep Space Nine. So unfortunately, considering Trek used to be everything to me, Enterprise came at a time when I couldn't care less about Trek. I half watched a couple of episodes and moved on. Now, though, thanks to the promise of discovery and the excitement generated by Trek FM, my love of Trek is starting to reawaken. So now it's all on Netflix. I think it's time I give Enterprise another chance. Yes, Tom, I do hope that you do. In my rewatch, I was watching the episodes and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Why didn't I enjoy it when it was first run? Mm-hmm. So please go back and watch Enterprise. It is definitely worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And, there's definitely some clunkers in there. I mean, every Trek series has them. Some maybe more so than others, but there's some really great stuff in there, and it really is worth a second look if maybe you've dismissed it in the past. So.
Oh, I wanted to read Dan Rhodes' comments. He says, I remember looking forward to it, but the broadcast time was wildly inconsistent in my area. And we've seen that if you read through the comments, there's just a lot of issues on when it was showing and what time it showed up and if it was too late or changed nights. Sometimes it was whatever evening or sometimes randomly dropped at noon on a Sunday. Well, that's just bizarre.
Wow.
I know. He continues and says, one thing I remember was a magazine article making a big deal about how practical the uniforms would be, especially the inclusion of pockets. Now, that's one thing that we've been talking about on Discovery and how they have these pockets. Why did pockets ever go away? I mean, what is it about the 24th century where we just don't need pockets anymore?
Well, I mean, the more philosophical among us, maybe we need to talk to Metatrex, but the idea of a socialist society where people don't have jobs to make money to acquire things, maybe that's why they got rid of pockets.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. If I don't need to carry around my money, I don't need my purse anymore. And your communicator is basically your phone, so you don't have to carry that anymore. So I guess so, but yeah.
It's social engineering to make you not want things, maybe. I'm joking, of course. But
there you go. Yes, exactly.
So kind of going back to that idea of wonder and the themes of the show, I liked this bit from Robert Morrison's comment where he says, I love every season and give each of them themes. First steps, exploration, war, alliances. I love the Xindi arc. And Enterprise would have done well with the Romulan War arc, but he appreciates what the Xindi arc was. I love Carbon Creek. That's a great episode from season 2. I love the trinity of Archer, Trip, and T'Pol, which was, like a very much an attempt to recreate the Kirk, Spock, Bones triad, right? So,
yes,
you definitely see those parallels there.
Mm-hmm.
He goes on to say, I love Phlox and Porthos, a dog on a starship. That's pretty cool. I mean, Data had a cat, but, a beagle on a starship. That's kind of awesome. And he goes on to say, I love this. It's the quieter moments I love the most. Trip and Mayweather in the sweet spot, the crew looking at a planet through the windows with wonder, the space shuttle-like cabin of the shuttle pod as they go down to the surface, exploring and camping on a strange new world, being excited by a comet and landing on it. Those moments of human wonder, Enterprise did them so well and could even have done them more. I love this show. And yeah, it was the little touches to me too that I think I really appreciated. I loved in the first season, they had the baseball caps with NX-01 on the hat. You know, it had that NASA feel, like these guys were, you know, the right stuff, heading out into space and really kind of connecting it to our time with those little touchstones. And kind of, I mean, I know they're still far in the future from us, but it really felt more like, what if we were out there and exploring? You know, I love TNG. I really do. And I love all those later series, but of course they're much more evolved than us. They've grown past our petty, you know, yada, 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 all that stuff. So it never really felt like us going out there. But with Enterprise, it was more, they were more rough around the edges. They were a little bit more 21st century human, you know, and I kind of like that. It allowed the viewer to put themselves in the place of these guys.
Yes, it definitely made us closer. That is like, oh, this really could be us in a few years. Yeah. So talking about that, I wanted to touch on a couple people talked about the temporal Cold War. Janet Lee says, actually, the studio wanted the show to not be too much of a prequel, so the writers came up with the temporal Cold War. Since I'm not a fan of that, it's obvious the writers' hearts were not into it. Okay. But Christopher Query says, in my headcanon, Enterprise was not a prequel as well due to the temporal Cold War. It leads to a slightly altered TOS and TNG. Riker and Troy visiting the NX-01 on the holodeck didn't happen in the original Prime timeline. Therefore, Discovery is also not a prequel.
Well,
thoughts?
I mean, it's all up to what the intent behind the show is, and it's intended to be a prequel to TOS. As with every bit of the Star Trek universe, there are some things that don't quite fit. You kind of have to squint to make it all fit in perfectly. But of course, you know, us Star Trek fans, we're perfectionists. We like everything to be just so. So, I mean, I understand the idea behind that comment. I don't know. I'm a little bit more forgiving about that kind of stuff. I mean, I did get mad when the Ferengi showed up in season 1 of Enterprise. And just, that's one that I kind of like grit my teeth and bear. They don't say the word Ferengi, so it's okay.
Right.
But
yeah.
not really. So, you know, I get it. I understand the idea behind that, but at the same time, yeah, no, it is a prequel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do have to say the temporal Cold War thing, they definitely have a point there. If you watch the recent Blu-rays, I think had a really interesting feature with Rick Berman and Brannon Braga, and their whole idea for the first season was very different than from what we got. And they kind of wanted to spend an entire season before they even got into space. You know, they wanted to do the lead up to building this ship and getting it off the ground kind of thing. And it really was the network that wanted this temporal Cold War and get us into space right away and have this weird time thing. And yeah, you can kind of tell maybe they weren't really into it as much as the studio wanted them to be, kind of thing. So yeah, it's to me my least favorite aspect of Enterprise. And I feel sorry for the creators of the show kind of having to work with that. And I think they did the best they could. I mean, everybody does the best they can, you know? So,
Yeah. Well, Peter Wood talks, says, I remember the local newspaper had a feature in the entertainment section breaking down what was going to be new about Enterprise. I was looking forward to it, but I also was disappointed it was going to be a prequel. I recall noting that the series were progressively going to more extreme lengths to try and recapture the frontier feel of TOS. TNG had established the 24th century as being more familiar and comfortable, and so DS9 had sat the show on a border station right next to a wormhole to a previously unreachable part of the galaxy. Voyager had just thrown the ship into a different unreachable part of the galaxy and cut them off from the Federation entirely. And now here's Enterprise trying to do it by being set decades before Kirk and even before the Federation itself. And every time, the comfort and security and emphasis on diplomatic relations over exploration snuck back in. I think that's interesting because he recognizes the fine line between exploring and then that diplomatic and being Federation type of thing. And I think Enterprise does actually a really good job recognizing both of those aspects and the necessities that the NX-01 has to do that. Like, they are exploring, but they are also representing this planet Earth at the time and then leading to representing the Federation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Those, especially a lot of the ideas in season 1, that kind of pioneering, going out there, finding a lost Earth colony, or reining in a freighter crew who are, taking on pirates by themselves and that kind of thing. It really brought that kind of Wild West feeling back to Star Trek. And it was a fine line they were kind of straddling from time to time, for sure. So yeah, an interesting take on that. I hadn't really thought of that. That's a great comment.
Yeah. Well, I have one last comment to read, unless you have another one.
No, I think we covered most of the main points that I wanted to talk about anyway. Some really, really insightful comments by everyone who commented, for sure. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed reading everybody's responses here.
Yes, definitely. Well, I wanted to close with Nick Anastasio's comment. He says, the build up to the premiere of Enterprise was probably the most quiet for me. 911 had just happened. There were also 15 years of continuous Trek piling up. Trek fatigue was setting in, even though many of us, including myself, didn't realize it at the time. Ironic, because I absolutely loved Broken Bow, which to this day I believe is the best of all Trek series premieres. And then he says, come on, Disco. Ironic also because, despite the fan fatigue, I got into Enterprise a lot more than Voyager, which had become stale for me. Still, I would say the real Enterprise premiere for me was in 2013. I was laid off that spring and spent a few months without work. It had been a rough couple of years, and the nail in my morale coffin was Star Trek Into Darkness, which I felt was a complete failure. I was spending a lot of time at home and feeling dejected by Star Trek Into Darkness. Decided to rewatch Enterprise as a form of therapeutic escape into a world I'd put aside for a while. It was the Trek series I knew least, having liked it but never revisited it since it first aired. And boy, was it love at first sight. I remember finishing Broken Bow, jumping up from the couch and yelling, "That's how you do modern Star Trek." I paced myself but went through the entire series in a couple of months and absolutely loved it. It had all the classic aspects of Star Trek that were dear to me, but was also the only Star Trek show to feature a modern aesthetic, episodic storytelling, and character development. My son had seen a few random episodes of the other series, but that summer, Enterprise also became the first series he watched from start to finish with me. That was a great bonding experience since it was my dad who brought me into Star Trek when I was but a wee lad. I'm one of those weirdos who actually prefers seasons 1 and 2 to seasons 3, though I also like that one, and who actually loves Faith of the Heart. Not the later seasons country version, but the original slower one. The song was really uncool at the time it first aired, yes, but the time I rediscovered, see what I did there, the series, it was old enough for me for it to not matter. And I was at the right place in my life for the lyrics to resonate with me. I know I'm corny. Well, Nick, you may be corny, but you have really touched on what, in my opinion, is Trek, and that is sharing it with your family and revisiting it when life may be throwing you some hard times, and really appreciating it for the Trek philosophy and what it does for your outlook on your life. So thank you for sharing your comments with us.
Definitely. I do want to comment a little bit, and it's something I forgot to bring up, that idea of Trek fatigue. I think was definitely something that was very real. I kind of, like him, was experiencing at the time and probably didn't realize it. Voyager was kind of by the time it ended. So, it's almost like Enterprise came at a time that didn't serve it as well as it could have. And it's for that reason that I think it is a very good show. And like Nicholas, a lot of people have revisited it years later and found it to be a really excellent show. And this comment is just beautiful. Painting the picture of coming back to Enterprise and what it can mean to someone was just beautiful. So thank you so much for that. That was excellent.
So, any closing thoughts that you have for Enterprise? I know we've covered quite a bit. What are your thoughts on Enterprise now?
Well, it's, to me, a series that I think, like we said earlier, didn't get a fair shake. I think I would have loved to see it continue past season 4. I think season 4 of Enterprise was some of the best Star Trek since, I'd say, probably season 6 of Deep Space Nine. Like, it's a great season of Star Trek, and it showed so much promise of what this series could be if it had been allowed to go forward. So, I remember at the time being really excited about a new Star Trek series, seeing the first hints of it on the internet, and then following it all the way through online with fans. It's really kind of the first communal Star Trek experience I ever had watching this with fans all over the world together, thanks to the World Wide Web. And it was a really sad thing when it was canceled. And, a lot of people talk about Star Trek fatigue, but now having gone 12 years without Star Trek on the air, I didn't think that is the worst thing. So, with Discovery coming, there's almost so much more fanfare to it now than there was for Enterprise, because Enterprise it almost felt, for better or worse, just tacked on to the end of all of the years of Star Trek on the air, the 18 years that Star Trek was continuously on the air. And now it's a rebirth. We're coming back to it. And so, boy, am I ever excited. I was excited when Enterprise started, but I don't think that's anything compared to how excited I am now.
Yeah, I watched Enterprise from first run and was excited and got into it first season. I was making sure to watch it every single night, and there wasn't DVR or anything. And my roommate at the time was controlling the VCR, so I couldn't even record it. She was recording her stupid soap operas or whatever. And so when it got to season 3 and the Xindi, I was done. I was like, okay, this is too out there, too bizarre. What in the heck is going on? I'm done. And I stopped watching it. But you would see commercials for it, when you'd watch other TV shows and stuff. And so then when they did the series finale and they were bringing Riker and Troy back, oh boy, was I on board. I made sure I was home. It was on my calendar. And I was like, finally, I get to see my next gen people come back, because that's what I had been waiting for. And so I remember at the time loving that series finale. And it's like, finally, it was done right. It just fit right in. And I was like, okay, you can end. That's because you ended on a high note. Then years later, coming into Trek FM, hearing all the complaints about this series finale. And I was like, what? I thought it was good. And then after doing my rewatch, going, oh, now I know why it wasn't good. That was a slap in the face. And I didn't realize that because of my love for Next Gen. And so I sort of feel bad that last episode was playing straight to me, Dan. It was.
Well, and I mean, I remember when it was coming out, when that episode hadn't aired yet, Brannon Braga, I think it was him anyway, was online saying it was a Valentine to Star Trek fans for 18 years of Star Trek shows. And we were all very excited about it. But yeah, oh man, it's sad to end on such a sad note, but that really was just a slap in the face to people who had loved Enterprise all those years. And, really, when you think about it, none of the Enterprise characters were actually in the episode. It was all just on the holodeck, Riker watching it, and they kill Trip off for no reason. It was just, oh man, so sad.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a mess, so I'm afraid.
I publicly apologize that last episode was written for me back in the day, but I now realize my mistake. It was.
Well, we forgive you, and even the writers. I think Brandon himself has come out and said that it was a misstep. That it was, and I mean, their hearts were in the right place. You can totally see what they were trying to do, but I think. It's kind of a classic case of not seeing the forest for the trees and not really realizing what they were doing when they did it. So, there's a lot of forgiveness in my heart for all the people that worked on Star Trek at the time because, they're doing the best they can.
Yes, agreed. Well, it's been fun talking about the fan response of Enterprise, but this isn't the only thing we've been discussing on the network. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
So yeah, I didn't have anything except I like the ogre being like really down to earth, like, hey, yeah, I'm Justin.
Hey,
Nice to
how's
meet
it going,
you.
man?
Yeah, how's it going? Yeah, because you expect me to go like, I'm an ogre, donkey, or whatever. But
No, I love that because especially since my husband and I have a D&D group, and so I was looking at that and going, oh, ogres. That is just so cute. I wonder what his armor class is.
Melodic Treks.
I really like the two Fairhaven episodes that we got. I know a lot of people are either very hot on these episodes or very cold on them. They've never bothered me. I think they're a lot of fun, and they're silly, but whatever. But one of the things that's really cool about them is we get something different in the musical field for Star Trek with this wonderful Irish-style music.
Earl Grey.
Well, I just noticed mine deals with all naked people.
Yeah. Richard!
Wow! All right.
Wait a minute. Oh, Justice Tappich, you're right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
I just noticed that. I was like, oh.
There's nudity in each of those episodes.
Well then.
TVMA.
Warp 5.
It was a weekly thing. It was originally on Tuesdays. At some point, Tripp decided to make it a nightly thing, or at least that was his idea, but then it went back to a weekly thing. I'm like, that sounds just like my life, because this is the type of thing where it's like, yeah, you get together every Tuesday, and then you gotta wait a whole week, and at some point you're like, we should be doing this every day.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We, of course, would love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Now, if you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select The Edge. That will come right to me. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. So Dan, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Well, you can find me right here on the Trek FM network. I co-host Literary Treks, the Star Trek books and comics show with Bruce Gibson, and we of course talk about all the Star Trek books and comics, including an original Discovery novel coming out next week, I believe. So very excited about that.
Yay!
Yeah.
I'm so excited too.
Oh man, yeah, we're going to have David Mack on the show. That'll come out a few weeks later. It's going to be great. You can also find me. I have a YouTube channel at youtube.com/KurtRatsProductions where I talk about, guess what? Star Trek. And you can find me on Twitter at KurtRats, that's KerTrats, and on Facebook.com/KurtRatsProductions, and in the Babel Conference, of course, talking about Star Trek.
So, would you like to tell our listeners where Kurtzrats came from?
I don't know. KerTrats. I challenge the listeners to figure it out.
Okay, you can tell me on the other side of the page.
All right, I'll do that.
Well, you can find me here on the network. I'm co-hosting On the Edge with my other hosts. That would be Aaron Harvey, Brendan Shea Mutella, and Mike Schindler. I'm also co-host on Earl Grey, which is our dedicated podcast to the next generation. And I'm Talking Trek with Justin Ozer and Richard Marquez. I'm also on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, but my favorite place to read your comments is on the Babel Conference. Well, if you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. At this time, we'd like to take a special moment to appreciate our associate producers, Norman Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, and Shoaib Mirza. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me here on Postcards from the Edge. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And wow, I can't wait to hear everybody's responses to Discovery. So, man, I'm going to be listening excitedly next week for sure.
Yes, so next week I am looking forward to reporting all of the fan response for our first episodes 1 and 2 will be combined on the next episode of Postcards. So join us next week for another episode of Postcards from the Edge. Hailing frequencies open.